Hello everyone. Back again with film recaps. In this video, I'm going to recap one of the thriller action films from 2024, titled The Silent Hour. Before we get to the storyline, I'd like to wish everyone a happy and great day. Without further ado, let's get straight to the storyline. The movie opens with Detective Frank, who works in the homicide division, getting ready for his day. He soon receives a call from his beloved daughter, Sam, who lives far away with her mother. She invites him to visit her for an important event, and he promises to attend. He also says that he has prepared a gift for her, but won't reveal it now. After the call, Frank meets with his co-worker, Slater, and they set out to interrogate someone. Slater urges Frank not to mess things up again by acting recklessly, which could land them in a tough situation. Soon after, the duo arrives at a port where they intend to question a worker named Jimmy. However, Jimmy isn't cooperative at all. He instead pulls out a gun and takes his co-worker hostage. He then recklessly fires at them and flees. Frank begins to chase him into a maze of shipping containers. On the other hand, Jimmy continues to fire in random directions, until his bullets finally run out. Realizing this, he rushes to the main road, attempting to flee. But Jimmy is hit by a passing vehicle that kills him instantly, and Frank also hits the same car on the head, making blood come out of his ears. The scene then cuts to several months after the incident, where we notice that Frank now uses a hearing aid. It turns out that during the accident, his cochlea was damaged, significantly reducing his hearing ability. Later, while Frank is at work, he gets a video call from Sam, who has started learning sign language for her dad. She invites him to attend her recital next week, but Frank refuses, saying he can't handle the noise of a crowd. Sam begs him to come, but suddenly Frank's hearing aid starts ringing loudly. As a result, he can no longer hear his daughter's voice, prompting him to hang up. Later, Frank goes to the doctor for a checkup on his condition. After conducting some tests, the doctor reveals that his cochlea has worsened significantly, and his hearing has decreased by 80%. She advises him to avoid exposing himself to loud noises too often, as he could become permanently deaf. The doctor also tells Frank to prepare for the worst, and to work on his sign language lessons, as this may be crucial for communicating in the future. In the evening, Frank returns to duty, where he is assigned to investigate a double homicide involving drug dealers in a place called Hyde Park. The victims were shot at close range, but no one witnessed the killer, and only heard gunshots. Frank meets the local man who first discovered the bodies, but as the man tries to explain something, Frank can't hear him properly. Here, he starts getting a headache as the noise of the helicopter's beacon, the camera, and the siren all blur together. In the end, the frustrated cop can't stand it anymore and chooses to retreat to the car. The next evening, a dejected Frank is drinking alone at the bar when his co-worker Slater suddenly arrives. Frank then turns up the volume on his hearing aid to better understand him. It turns out that Slater has transferred from the homicide division to the narcotics division. He tries to comfort his former partner, telling him that many police officers with disabilities are still doing their jobs well. However, his words don't seem to help Frank, who reveals that he feels completely useless, and is even considering quitting his job. Hearing this, Slater tries to offer Frank a job that suits his condition. It turns out there's a new lead in the Hyde Park case, and a witness has come forward, but she is deaf. Slater asks Frank to be the interpreter since the official interpreter is on leave until next week, so Frank states that he isn't that proficient in sign language. Despite this, his friend continues to insist, so he reluctantly accepts the offer. The witness is a 33-year-old woman named Eva, who was at the scene when the murder occurred. But instead of reporting it to the police right away, she waited 2 days before coming forward. The next day, the duo visits Eva's address, but notices that her building is largely unoccupied. They soon arrive at her apartment, where Frank tries to communicate with her in a somewhat amateur way. But this only irritates the woman as she was expecting a professional interpreter. She refuses to cooperate at first, but when Frank explains that he's just an old dog trying to learn new tricks after an accident, she eventually agrees to let them in. After this, Eva reveals that she's preparing to move out. It is because the building owner has evicted all the residents to transform the place into luxury condos. Slater then asks about the incident in Hyde Park, and we find out that although Eva is deaf, she can read lips. She reveals that on the night of the incident, she went outside to take some pictures, right when she saw a group of people fighting, and began recording it. Eva shows them the video, which ends with the shooting of 2 people. Upon seeing this, the cops are shocked, and Slater takes her phone as evidence, assuring her they'll return it soon. Eva expresses fear that if the murderers find out she spoke to the police, they'll kill her. And so, Frank promises that he won't let anything happen to her. He then heads to the bathroom, where he notices some medications on one of the shelves. Afterward, the cops decide to leave, and Slater reveals that he checked Eva's files and discovered she's been to rehab. Frank mentions that he saw naloxone, a medication used to treat drug overdoses, in her bathroom. This makes him certain that Eva wasn't out that night to take pictures, but was likely seeking drugs for herself. In the next scene, the cops drive away separately, with Slater taking Eva's phone as evidence. But soon after, Frank realizes he left his phone at Eva's apartment, and decides to turn back. At the same time, the people involved in the Hyde Park shooting suddenly arrive at her place, led by their boss, Mason. Mason stations his guard on the ground floor to keep watch, while he and other men go upstairs. After a while, Frank returns to the apartment, and notices a man guarding Eva's door, which he finds strange, but he remains calm and casually walks past the man. Frank then slips upstairs via the emergency staircase, and quietly approaches Eva's window from outside. He notices her being interrogated by Mason. The terrified Eva writes on a piece of paper and pleads with them not to hurt her. Meanwhile, Frank tries to listen, but struggles as the battery in his hearing aid is running low. Mason also asks Eva if anyone else has seen the video she recorded. She firmly says no, but Mason doesn't believe her, and prepares to kill her with an injection. With no other option, Frank breaks the glass window and enters inside. He grabs the guns from Mason and his henchman, Angel, and threatens to kill them unless they cooperate. Suddenly, another of Mason's henchmen enters the room with a gun, and this sparks a shootout where Frank accidentally ends up shooting Angel. In the chaos, Frank and Eva manage to make a run for it. A furious Mason orders his men to scatter and surround the building, ensuring that the two cannot escape. Meanwhile, Frank and Eva manage to hide in an empty apartment. She wonders how the criminals found her, and why they came to her only after she handed over the video to the police. Hearing this, Frank realizes that there must be a mole in the police force who leaked her information. He also accuses Eva of going out that night not to take photos, but to buy drugs. However, the woman insists she no longer uses drugs, and it is a thing of the past. She explains that she went out that night to celebrate because a gallery had offered to exhibit her photos. Eva admits she only reported the incident after 2 days because she was scared, as one of the victims was her former drug dealer. Next, Frank decides to go outside for a short while, hoping to find any residents with a phone so he can call the police. After he leaves, Eva tries to seek help by waving to a resident in the building across the street, but her efforts prove fruitless as no one seems to notice her. Then, she spots a police car parked in the lot and believes help has arrived. But to her dismay, she notices that these officers are actually working with the gangsters and have come to help them. Meanwhile, a medic arrives at the building to help Angel, who was shot earlier. She begins to treat him, with Mason assisting as best he can. However, moments later, he suddenly notices Frank's phone there and is shocked. Mason immediately alerts his team, realizing that Frank doesn't have his phone, and is likely searching for one to call the police. He orders his men, the police, to search every room in the building to find the two. He also instructs them to intercept any 911 calls from the building, and redirect them to their own lines. Elsewhere, Frank returns to Eva empty-handed after his unsuccessful search for a phone. She then tells him about how the cops are collaborating with the gangsters. Stunned, Frank realizes that Mason himself is a corrupt cop involved with the drug dealers. It means that every move he makes could be anticipated by Mason and his team. But just when all hope seems lost, Frank comes up with a plan and rushes toward the elevator. Meanwhile, the villains are monitoring the CCTV feeds, and finally spot Eva and Frank on the 6th floor. We then realize that the duo has actually been searching for the emergency intercom inside the elevator. Frank desperately calls for help through the intercom, and simply requests that they contact Detective Slater, the only person he trusts in this dire situation. But unfortunately, we only hear automated responses from the other end. The duo then tries to leave the elevator, but is attacked by the cops, forcing them to retreat inside. At the same time, Mason receives news about Frank's location and heads toward the elevator, leaving the apartment unguarded. Here, Frank quickly takes down the CCTV, and presses various buttons to confuse the gangsters. The two eventually get off on the 10th floor, and go inside Eva's apartment to retrieve his phone. There, they find Angel, with the medic. But then, the latter refuses to get involved, claiming it's not part of her job. Angel quickly calls Mason for help, but Eva quickly knocks him out. Next, the duo steals Angel's phone, and immediately heads to another room. By the time the bad guys arrive, the frustrated Mason discovers that the two have taken Angel's phone and tries to make a call. Eva reads his lips from her hiding spot and quickly silences the phone to avoid detection. Meanwhile, Frank texts Slater and asks him to call the number right away. But unfortunately, as a result, Mason becomes alert to the noise and their presence, forcing the duo to flee again through the window. Frank and Eva make their way into the stairwell, and enter another apartment to hide. While there, they receive a video call from an unknown number, and it turns out to be Slater. Frank's hearing aid battery is completely dead, and he can't hear anything at this point, so Eva helps in reading Slater's lips. Frank then explains the situation to his friend and, after listening carefully, Slater promises to come with reinforcements. But just then, Mason and his team discover their location, and arrive to attack again, so the duo quickly opens the window to sneak into the next room. During their escape, Eva suddenly stops and asks how the gangsters knew where they were. Here, Frank realizes they're being traced through Angel's phone, so he wraps the cell phone in his shirt and throws it to the ground floor. The corrupt cops and the henchmen rush to there, only to find it's just a ruse. At this point, Mason's patience is running out, and he orders everyone to search every door in the building and finish them both off. Meanwhile, Frank and Eva find a hiding spot, but soon notice Slater arriving in the building. It turns out the idiot has come alone and hasn't brought any reinforcements. Frank becomes worried for his clever friend, and decides to go down to help him. Soon enough, they arrive in the lobby, and find Slater being held at gunpoint by one of the gangsters. This leaves Frank with no choice, but to surrender his weapon. But as soon as he does so, his friend picks it up, and points it at him. In a shocking turn of events, it is revealed that Slater is also part of the corrupt gang, and the mole in the police force that Frank previously mentioned. The man looks very annoyed, and asks Frank why he came back to the building and acted like a hero. At this moment, Mason and his men inject drugs into Eva's hand, causing her to pass out. It turns out they plan to overdose her and make it look like she did it to herself. After this, Slater tries to bribe Frank to keep his mouth shut and join their gang, so our hero reluctantly agrees, as he has no other choice. This pleases the villains, and they place Eva's unconscious body alone in her room. They then take Frank and proceed to leave the building. However, once inside the elevator, Frank comes up with a plan. He grabs the cop's gun and closes the elevator door by pressing the button, trapping them inside for a while. He rushes back to Eva's room, and injects her with naloxone, which he found in her bathroom. The woman soon wakes up, but informs Frank that the effects of naloxone only last 10 minutes, after which she will pass out again. Meanwhile, Mason orders his men to surround the building and search every corner. He tells them to block all exits, and decides to kill Frank by himself this time. Elsewhere, Frank hands Eva the gun and tells her to shoot anyone who enters the window. He then begins pouring petrol all over the place. Without wasting any time, Frank quickly lights the fire. Moments later, thick smoke begins rising, catching the attention of pedestrians below. Soon enough, several police cars and fire trucks arrive at the building. This forces most of the thugs to abandon their mission and flee the scene. In the meantime, Mason, who is outside, enters the apartment through the window, determined to find Frank and Eva, who are still hiding. He quickly makes his way to the toilet. But then all of a sudden, The duo douses him with acetone and causes him to scream in pain, while they manage to run away. Despite the situation, a resilient Mason still refuses to give up and forces Slater to help him track them down. The duo keeps running, and eventually enters a musician's apartment, where they discover a music studio. Shortly after, Slater and Mason enter the apartment to catch the duo, while Mason's vision is blurry from the acetone. Then, as Slater enters one of the rooms, Eva and Frank suddenly blast metal music at an ear-shattering volume, causing his eardrums to burst. He stumbles out of the room, and gets shot by Mason, who still can't see clearly. Mason gets frustrated after realizing what he has done, and simply leaves. Soon after, Slater ends up passing away, while Eva's naloxone wears off, causing her to lose consciousness. A worried Frank tries to revive her, but he senses someone coming and quickly hides. Mason, who shows up, is surprised to see the unconscious woman. But then suddenly, Frank sneaks up and knocks him out with a guitar. After that, he carries the unconscious Eva and rushes out of the burning building as fast as he can. Frank hands over Eva's unconscious body to the ambulance crew. They use emergency methods to resuscitate her, while Frank watches, full of worry. The scene then abruptly cuts to the future, where we see Frank finally attending his daughter's recital. Before the film ends, Eva arrives and sits beside Frank, before taking his hand. She survived the ordeal, and now the two appear to be in a relationship. Okay guys, thanks for watching. See you again in the next video.